Marshall Chriswell and another installment of Martial Law with us now, and this program intended to be for informational purposes only. The information does not constitute legal advice. The law is constantly changing. The information may not be complete or correct depending on the date and your particular legal problem, and each legal problem depends on its individual facts, and different jurisdictions have different laws and regulations. Because of these differences, you should not act or rely on any information in this segment without seeking the advice of a competent attorney licensed to practice law in your jurisdiction for your particular problem. And one of those competent attorneys we know of well is Marshall Chriswell. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good to have you on the air with us again.
Nice to be here.
Well, I wanted to talk about something that is actually very much in the news this spring in legal terms, and that is the idea of signing a waiver that would basically eliminate liability concerns for people who are welcoming you either in a professional sense or in terms of holding an event. Liability waivers, let's get into that a little bit this morning.
Sure. Yeah, liability waivers. It's an interesting topic, particularly in our current situation with the pandemic we're experiencing. And so, I guess let's start with what is a liability waiver. Okay. This is a legal document, normally called a waiver or a release and indemnification. It goes by several different names, but this is something that normally a business or an organization is asking you to sign in order to engage in a voluntary activity that might be dangerous. Mm-hmm. So, if you're going to a ski resort and you're going to be doing some downhill skiing, they may have you sign or ask you to sign a liability waiver. I know when I took my kids to Sky Zone, where you can jump on trampolines and do those things, they had everybody sign a liability waiver. So it's a document that basically says that your host, the organization, the corporation that's hosting you or a particular event, is not responsible for any injury or bodily harm that you experience as a result of engaging in that activity.
Mm-hmm. Now, is it a little stronger than what we typically see at some places, which is enter at your own risk?
It is. A liability waiver is much more broad reaching than that. It's going to generally have some detailed language saying that the company or the host or the organization is not responsible, even in the case of their own negligence. If they do something that that there was a faulty trampoline or a ski slope that was more dangerous than your normal ski slope, something that they could have prevented, you're even going to be restricted from suing in that instance. So in that respect, it is more broad-reaching than just you're saying that you're assuming the risk.
I'm picturing Marshall Chriswell walking with the kids into the trampoline park and them handing him the waiver like they do every other person that comes in, and you actually reading it. People need to read these things, don't they?
Yeah, they had these on iPads or some kind of tablets that were set up along a wall when you came in, and you had to read them. And of course, I know that if I sign that on behalf of my children, that under Pennsylvania law, it doesn't prevent it only prevents me from suing on behalf of my children. It doesn't prevent my children from suing. It also doesn't prevent my wife from suing on behalf of my children. So I was okay signing that.
Don't you wonder if I bet you didn't point that out to them, did you?
No, I didn't. But yeah, that's with kids. You've got to have both parents sign, and even when you do, the children can't sign. They can't enter into a contract when they're under 18 years of age. So it's a lot harder when you're dealing with minors to get liability released.
All right. So what you said a couple of seconds ago really does apply. And in our disclaimer when we begin this segment, different jurisdictions have different laws. Is Pennsylvania's different substantially from other states?
Very much so. These laws do vary. The statutes and case laws vary greatly from state to state. There are some states that don't even permit liability waivers between businesses and private individuals. I know Virginia, I think Montana, there are a few others that it is just illegal to even have someone, these waivers are not enforceable at all.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's pretty interesting. All right, so this being the political season, political rallies will be taking place. There was one over the weekend at which people had to sign a waiver in order to go into the rally. That's going to happen all over the United States. People are going to really have to be sharp, are they not?
Yeah, that's it. That's interesting that you've got folks showing up to these rallies, and you actually have the candidates, the campaigns, requiring liability waivers for COVID-19. I mean, this is not something that you saw in the past. Before, pre-pandemic, there were not liability waivers at every political rally, but now there are, and so obviously the campaigns are attempting to protect themselves from lawsuits based on these mass gatherings, and we'll see. These waivers are not always enforced by courts.
Mm-hmm.
It is very fact specific. You've got to look at the language of the waiver, and the law says here in Pennsylvania. The law says the provisions need to be clear. These cannot be agreements that are buried in the fine print of some other contract. They can't be mired in legalese. They need to be written in plain language that people can understand. So that it's from one waiver to another. I mean, they're always examined very carefully in a court.
All right, I want to turn it in two different directions, both of them involving attorneys. And first of all is I can imagine somebody who operates a business coming up with a waiver, and I can very easily imagine them going to the Internet, downloading some form and saying, this is good for me, and I'm going to put this in, and it's going to be legally binding. Not the case.
Not the case at all. What you're usually going to pull from the Internet is something, number one, that's not state-specific. And as I said, each state is going to have their own requirements for these waivers, and the case law in states has developed in different ways, and so judges are going to be looking for different key words and phrases in those releases, and also a lot of the waivers that you're going to, if you just pull a random waiver, it's normally going to have way too much what I call legalese, too many words like heretofores and wherebys and all and long paragraph long sentences that nobody can understand, and these things need to be written very, very clearly, because the person signing them, what our case law in Pennsylvania says is they need to truly understand what they're signing. So it's something that it's actually sometimes more difficult, right, to write something that is specific and that is very coherent and somebody would understand, rather than writing a very broad legal waiver. So you've got to have it written, and it needs to be specific for your business and the types of risks that someone's going to encounter. If you're a dentist's office, it's much different than the waiver you're going to want to have is much different than if you're operating a summer camp for kids.
Well, that was my next question. We've been talking about generally, recreational activities and those sorts of things, but especially this year in the coronavirus age, dentists are one that we've heard of, and there are other professions that normally you wouldn't even be thinking about a waiver, but we're finding out that is the case, that there are some that do, as a matter of feeling comfortable in themselves and doing business, they ask for the waiver now, and those have to be written, don't they?
They do, and it's very interesting to see a medical office or a dentist's office requiring a waiver, because normally those a waiver of liability in a medical setting is generally unenforceable, right? If the doctor or a dentist does something negligently and you get hurt, you need to be able to sue them for malpractice. So it's interesting that we're seeing these, and the bottom line is, COVID waivers haven't been tested in the courts yet. Nobody knows what a court in Pennsylvania or anywhere else is going to do. So businesses are saying, well, this is just one line of defense that I'm going to put in place, and hopefully it helps if I get sued.
All right, so let's look at it from this angle, because there are a lot of angles here. You're somebody who has signed a waiver and something has happened and you feel like you should have some sort of recompense. Do they then find themselves an attorney who can really give them the advice they need?
Sure. One of the first things that an attorney is going to do if they're going to sue on behalf of someone that was injured and there was a waiver involved, they're going to want to get their hands on that waiver. Generally, through the discovery process, you're going to get that document, and you're going to want to look at that very carefully and say, well, what is the likelihood that in this situation, in these circumstances, and with this particular waiver, that a judge is going to throw out my client's case on summary judgment, which is what the company would be filing to say, Judge, this lawsuit should just go away completely. It should be thrown out because the person signed this liability waiver. So you've got to look at that very carefully and think, okay, how does that impact the value of the case? Is it something that it looks like, well, this wouldn't be an enforceable waiver anyway? It was so poorly written, or it wasn't signed by the right person, or whatever. Or is this something that really could cause a problem with the case and make you want to think about what the value of it is?
Well, this is really an interesting topic. We could bat this one around for a while. I would imagine there are a number of ways to approach this that I haven't even come close to. But you need to really be up on what the law says. You need to try to interpret the new coronavirus age read it into the law the way Pennsylvania is written, and then you need to then look at that waiver and say, okay, is this going to fit under the standard definition, or does coronavirus make this even different or more difficult?
Right, absolutely, and it'll be interesting, really, to see what kinds of legal actions are going to emanate from coronavirus and how those are treated by the courts, whether there's a waiver or not. Somebody gets coronavirus. I think one of the toughest things is going to be obviously proving where you got it. Right.
Yeah.
So even if I was at the Trump rally with 20,000 of my closest friends, I come down, a week later, I'm diagnosed with COVID. How am I going to prove that that's where I got it? Sure, that's the most likely scenario, but you've got to be able to prove causation, and so that's going to be tough.
Yeah, really is. Okay, so there you are in your brand new offices, getting set to kick off another day of legal. Well, you've actually been in open there for an hour or so because you get there early. But folks want to get in contact with you, discuss this or any other legal topic. What do they need to do?
Give me a call, 724-465-5826. You can stop and see us in the R&P Cole building over on Church Street. Or just go to the website at westernpalawyer.com.
He is Attorney Marshall Chriswell. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. Have a great day.
You too. We'll see you.
Bye.
We'll see you.
Bye.
We'll see you.